Go. Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer. This is Matrix Mash number 26. It's been 3 weeks since our last one, and the next one we're going to be together, Robert. I'm very excited. How you doing?
I'm great. Doing great.
I just had to extract you from your own shows into another show. You had a good little interesting show this morning. I think some of the things you were talking about were pretty interesting, especially when you got into talking about that movie, The Wave. Because I remember seeing that when I wouldn't say a kid, like a little kid, but definitely like a young adult, like in my late teens or early 20s. And I remember like how creeped out I was by it, right? Like for me, it seemed to have actually like served as like a warning, you know what I mean? To, you know, avoid the madness of crowds.
So the movie that Emily is referring to is based on an experiment, a theoretical experiment that was conducted by a guy by the name of Ron Jones in 1967 at Cubberley High School in Palo Alto, which is, you know, right in the backyard of Stanford. And Ron Jones was a member of SDS, Students for Democratic Society. And SDS was the sort of anti-war group movement prior to 1968. In 1968, they were usurped by the Weather Underground at the SDS convention in 1968. Essentially, Bernardine Dorn and Bill Ayers and Mark Rudd, particularly Dorn and Mark Rudd, were the ones that took over the conference, literally took over the conference and literally took over the movement from that point forward. And there's some pretty interesting links with all three of them that they were more than likely connected to one of the alphabet groups, AKA the C and the I and the A, right? So they're now what's interesting during that time is that the CIA and the FBI were actually rival groups, and they didn't really cohabitate together that much. And for people that aren't aware of this, the CIA is really not allowed to operate inside of the American borders. They're not allowed to do that. Like the CIA, one of the rules that the CIA can only be engaged in international operations, and the CIA is an outgrowth of the OSS. And the OSS really comes out of World War II, and the first OSS and CIA operatives were drafted out of Skull and Bones. Right? So that's where all these roots come from. So in order to make sure that they had a check and balance with power, they're not supposed to operate inside the continental US, which obviously they have done again and again and again and again, and do so to this day. Now the FBI is different. The FBI does operate inside of the continental US. So these two groups were split, and it was the FBI who had infiltrated the Weather Underground.
Yeah.
It was the FBI who had infiltrated the Black Panther.
What was that guy's name? Larry something or other? That
Larry Grathwold.
Grathwold. Yeah.
Larry Grathwold, and he is. You could watch video of him. I think Edward G. Griffin has him on one of his videos, and he talks about being inside the Weather Underground and what they plan to do. And what they plan to do was to create camps where they would re-educate Americans, and they had no problem, you know, killing of upwards of 5 to 7 million Americans if they needed to. And these are all people that went to Ivy League schools. And of course, Bill Ayers comes from a very well-to-do family in Chicago. Bill Ayers' dad served on a number of commissions, public utility commissions, and boards in Chicago that have to do with power, electricity, water, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, Bill Ayers is really a silver spoon, red diaper baby. And so the FBI got into the Weather Underground, and what they did is they broke them down. You know, they basically would go in, they knew where they were. Grathwold, of course, was on the inside. They didn't know that Grathwold was on the inside. And Grathwold would, you know, give them locations.
Yeah.
So when they were out, like when the Weather Underground or certain members were out, if they have like a group house, and they were out, the FBI would go in and they would basically ransack their place. And that was before they had things like video cameras and shit like that.
Yeah.
So what happened with the Weather Underground is that they became more increasingly paranoid because they knew that they were being watched. You know, they would have cars that would follow them. They knew the cars were following them. So in essence, what you had is you had like this conflict between the FBI and the CIA, essentially. And they weren't on the same page for a long time. Now they seem to be kind of more linked as one body, Peter Strzok moving back and forth between both the CIA and the FBI. And then eventually they applied so much pressure on the Weather Underground that they had to separate, right? They had to separate. They couldn't live together. They couldn't even live in the same city. And they had to have very arcane kinds of codes and ways of meeting. And then at some point, you know, people who, you know, and they depended on, like if you belonged to the Weather Underground, you needed them for a lot of things. You needed them for money, right? Because you could not get a job. You know, back then, you know, it was like, where's your employment record? Oh, well, I've been, you know, setting bombs off for the last 2 years in public buildings. Now you'd probably get a job real easy. But back then you couldn't do that. So you needed the resources of the Weather Underground to stay alive, right? And when that supply line broke down and you couldn't get that, and there was one gal, I forget her name, but at one point she was just cut off. They were like, you're no longer in the circle. And they made the circle smaller and smaller and smaller. And then they started to have babies. And that's when, you know, they gave themselves up to be around, you know, they came out from, you know.
They got their university professorships then and all that stuff.
Well, I think they had to do some nominal kind of time.
Yeah.
But then eventually it did become university professors. And now Susan Rosenberg, who is, was one of the Weather Underground, is, I guess she's the head of Share Blue, which is Act Blue, which is an aggregator for all these funds that come in through BLM and all these other sources. Oh, and by the way, BLM has taken some very pertinent information down from its webpage. The stated and desired goal to destroy the nuclear family has been removed.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, so they're understanding that, yeah, and again, this is all very experimental too, which was like kind of the topic of my show today. It's like, what can they get away with? You know, what can they get away with? And how do they parse that information?
Well, a couple of things as you're talking that I'm thinking about, like, I see like what happened with that classroom with the wave guy.
Yeah, let's get back to that. Just real quick, what happened? And and you can jump in.
Okay.
What happened is this guy, Ron Jones, who was an SDS member, decides for his class, who wasn't really getting sort of the historical thing. Mm-hmm. This is 1967. Education is going through a big sea change. It's a lot more touchy-feely. It's California. It's not, you know, Des Moines, Iowa. So this guy says, well, what I want to do is I want to create this thing called the Third Wave. It's a new party. And we're going to basically run an experiment. We're going to turn that third wave into something very fascistic. And it's about discipline, order, and control. Mm-hmm. And he wanted it to just be in the confines of his classroom. Within 3 days, it had spread the entire school and was out of control. It was totally out of control. And the kids responded with like fervor. Yeah. Fervor. They were very into this idea of power and control. And what's interesting is that astrologically, this is when kids go through the Saturn opposition. Yeah. Between roughly 15 and 16. And they're looking to break away from existing structures in their life, right? That's what happens. And so does it matter what the structure is that they're moving into, right? They just saw this as a new structure. And so they went into it in a very Saturnian fashion. Yeah. Now what happens is that separation or that opposition looks very, very different. Very different. And now, in the world that we're living in, you know, you have things like the rainbow movement, right, where these kids have infiltrated high schools, and they're
And
trying to pull
the sunrise movement too, right?
sunrise, my bad, sunrise.
Yeah.
Sunrise, thanks.
Yeah.
There's probably a rainbow one too. Anyway, the sunrise movement.
I'm sure there's a rainbow one.
Yeah, and that came out of Parkland.
Yeah.
And they wanted to pull kids away and then indoctrinate them into the crisis of climate change, and they're radicalizing them. So, it doesn't matter really what the group is, right? There's this astrological alignment where kids are moving away from the structures that they grew up with, and all they have to do is insert something else.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's interesting. A couple of things come up as I was listening to you talk about it today on your show, and as you talk about it here, that like Stanford, like, is really, like, when we're talking, obviously they receive a lot of funding for mind control programs and all that kind of stuff, but it serves really as more as the laboratory. This whole thing he did at the school was in a very controlled environment, right? And then at the point where they are sure that the technique works, then it becomes the tools of the intelligence agencies that originally sponsored the research at the university or in the local laboratories or classrooms or whatever, right? So when what Jones had done with, who was a member of the SDS at the high school, when they understood that technique worked, then you have the Weather Underground, which is a more controlled group, right? That is sort of putting some of that into place, right?
Well, also it leads into the Stanford Prison Experiment.
Yes.
Which happens in 1974.
Yes.
Right, which is 7 years after that.
Yeah.
That's a Saturn cycle, by the way.
Yeah.
And then Philip Zimbardo, who's a professor at Stanford, basically leads it's really like a 73 days, 72 hours, and in 3 days, all hell breaks loose.
Yeah.
All hell breaks loose.
I mean, that's one of those experiments that, we return to time and time again when we talk about some of this kind of stuff. But what I'm thinking about is, as we're discussing this third wave, and you're talking about this sort of age group and an induction into like its structure or a group that's different than their family. 15 or 16 is also like the likely age somebody would join a gang, right? Yeah. Like, so this is like another version of that. And
what's really interesting about the gang thing? I was going to really interject here really quickly.
Yeah.
I was looking at the Amish.
Mm-hmm.
And the Amish have gangs.
Yep.
And they actually encourage their kids to join a gang.
Yep.
Inside of the Amish community.
Mm-hmm.
And it's right around this time that you're talking about.
They encourage them to join gangs. They encourage them when they turn 18 to leave the Amish for a period of time and go out and experience the world and then decide what they want to do and whatnot. I've watched an interesting documentary one time about that period of time in the Amish kid's life and whatnot. And it's actually quite interesting. Like, I watched this teenage Amish kid who was like, breaking the rules. He had his horse and buggy all wired with Bluetooth to listen to house music and shit like that. It was fucking hilarious, right? But it really followed these kids who were in this age group, 15 to like 21, right? Yep. And there's all this stuff going on. It was it was like a documentary series. I can't remember where I saw it. But
you're right. You're absolutely right. It's when kids join gangs.
Yeah, it's when kids. Go ahead.
Yeah. And gangs provide structure.
Yeah, and I think some of this, what we're talking about, like this third wave and these techniques that he created to do this, I think we're seeing some of that, those techniques, and it comes from similar ilk, experimented with, or not experimented with, but trying to be deployed again through Unity 2020, mm-hmm. right? Like, I think that Brett Weinstein would be another version of like what you saw, right? When I'm starting to look further and further into him and where he comes from and what's going on with him, like, he is that, I mean, they're just going in a different order now, right? He's been the professor first, and now he's trying to lead the social movement. But I'm seeing a lot of this way of speaking about things, use of particular kinds of language, reinforcing of certain sort of ideas and always stating them in the same kind of way, certain terms popping up over and over, almost as like trigger or cueing language and stuff like that, right? So I think we're seeing that there. And I want to talk a little bit about that in a bit, but also when you were talking about the CIA and that they're not supposed to operate in the United States, well, we all know that one of the main ways that they do operate within the United States is in-Q-tel, right? Mm-hmm. And it was funny. I was just reading that today, and you don't often think about how it's spelled, but in-Q-tel's got a great big Q in the middle.
Yes.
Right? I was reading an article that mentioned in-Q-tel this week that had nothing to do with Q, but I'm like, oh, that's pretty interesting right there, right? And it could go either way, right? They could be Q, or it could be that the people who chose to do Q chose that partly because people might think that it was the CIA because of in-Q-tel or whatever. But I was looking at that this week. But yeah, I don't know. I think this what you're onto, and I think you were talking about it. Like in terms of, I heard you talking about, what's going on in Victoria and why nobody's doing anything, right? Like, and you were talking about Bono, right? And all the people that are supposed to be humanitarian and all that kind of stuff. Dude, Bono's a fucking weird one, dude. And I know why they use Bono for all of these humanitarian rights fights and all this kind of stuff. I was never really a fan of U2 music. I was okay, right? But I had a friend who was just obsessed with it. And so like one day I'm like, I'm going to listen and see if I can understand why, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And there's a timbre that he hits in his voice, like a tone or something that he occasionally hits, that even though I don't care for him or his music, it caused the same interesting visceral vibrational thing in my body that when certain elements of dance music on a big sound system hit, where you're just mm-hmm. like, it just opens you up. Right? Mm-hmm. So like mm-hmm. the tone, it just opens you up, and then whatever comes out after that, and you're just completely open to this person, just like you're open to the full experience at a rave or whatever when the sound system is a function one and it's really good, right? And I think that more than anything is why they use him.
So this is you bring up a really interesting point. There was Lou Reed gave an interview one time. And they were talking about U2, and they were on tour together for this Amnesty concert. Mm-hmm. And I saw both Lou Reed and U2 at a show in San Francisco. And Lou Reed said something interesting about Bono. He said he gave me a really good, what's the word I'm looking for? He gave me a really good tip. He said that when you get to a certain place vocally, you extend it out mm-hmm. for a certain period of time, mm-hmm. and you'll be able to.
I was like, is that your tea ready or what's going on?
That's my.
That's an interesting tone.
Yeah, that's my ringtone for my phone. Hold on a second. Got to just slide the phone off. But Bono was instructing them essentially how to hypnotize the crowd.
Yep.
That's what he was doing. And Lou Reed, basically said, he didn't say it in those terms, mm-hmm. but that's exactly what Bono was telling them to do. And I saw U2 on their first U.S. tour. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget it. I was living in the Bay Area, and back when, you would go to, Bass Tickets and get your ticket, right? You go up and you would go to a Sears, and there were these guys in line behind me, and they heard me say 2 tickets for U2, please, right?
Yeah.
And they were laughing, and they were like, and these are like, sort of metal dorks. Yeah. Oh, U2, oh, what the fuck is that? Oh, Yeah. And they were like, I was like, dude, you have no idea. And I listened to their music, from the jump. So I went to that concert. Let me tell you, that concert, that first U2 concert, was about as close to church as you could get.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
It was powerful.
Yeah.
Very powerful. Like you left that concert feeling like you just had communion.
Yep. I mean, that's for me when I go to an amazing party or something, like, I mean, especially back in like the early going to the rave days and stuff like that. That's what it felt like, dude. I'd be driving home from the party on Sunday morning and I'd see people going into church and I'd be like, now I know why they go to church, for the experience that I just had, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. It just completely takes you out of yourself and is, you know, like completely spiritual in nature, and every, you know, it's overwhelming. And his voice has the power to do that. And, you know, and then to introduce a lot of ideas based on the visuals that are associated with him and his music, and then his social activities, because once people are entranced, it follows you home from the concert.
Mm-hmm. No, totally. And it's also interesting watching sort of the evolutionary arc of U2's records.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one, Boy, is very innocent. It's very, very innocent. And it has all these songs about kind of, you know, growing up, having faith, and the sound is really incredible. Like it's very full
Mm-hmm.
sonic effect. Steve Lillywhite, who was the hot producer at the time, I believe was the producer of that record. And they're coming out at the same time that Echo and the Bunnymen, Teardrop Explodes, and Psychedelic Furs. Like they all came out at the same time. And they all have this kind of interesting sort of psychedelic new wave sound. And U2 is in that group. And then the second album comes in, which is, I believe, October, which is not a great album, but has In the Name of Love, which is one of the huge hits. I saw that tour. And again, the same kind of effect, right? And it was not as well received, and a very uneven album. And then the War album comes out. And that's when there's a huge shift with U2.
Yeah.
And they become political.
Yeah.
Right. They really become political with War. And then after War hits, then it's the Joshua Tree record comes out.
Joshua Tree and Rattle and Hum and all that stuff.
So and I'll never forget the first time I heard Joshua Tree. I was in Aquarius Records in San Francisco. Which was the place to buy your records, and they had a pre-release copy, and they were playing Joshua Tree before it hit radio, and I'm listening to it, and I'm going, holy fuck! I said, this is going to be huge.
Yeah.
This is going to be freaking huge. I said, is this U2? And they said, yeah, this is the new record. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
So that was produced by Brian Eno.
Yeah.
And you could really hear the Eno effect in that record.
His soundscapes are, yeah, you can't.
They're incredible. He's an interesting character too, by the way. So I got a copy of the record and I started playing it. Of course, back in the day, we had cassettes. I taped the cassette and, went on a trip to Big Sur and, played that thing. But then the really interesting record for them ultimately is Berlin, is the whatchamacallit, the one they recorded in Berlin, Achtung Baby. Achtung Baby sees them going into this real decadence, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, fuck it, we're rock stars now, right? We went out, we explored the spatial expanse of America, influenced by this open sound of the Joshua Tree. And it's like the Joshua Tree is the culmination of everything start with Boy. And it's like, well, where do they go after that? Well, they go dark.
Yeah.
They go dark and they get right in to that post-World War II Weimar Republic kind of vibe. And they never really recover from that.
Yeah.
Right? They try to come back and, try to capture some kind of innocence. It's a beautiful day or whatever. But that's when the band goes to the dark side.
Mm-hmm.
And then they make that really, really crappy record, Lemon. Right? Isn't that what it's called? Shitty record. It's
called Lemon.
Total lemon. And then they come back and they have another record after that, which is pretty good. But it's that Achtung Baby. That's where they go dark.
Yeah. I mean, that's where they, so I was never, like I said, a big U2 fan, but I waited on Bono one time when I was living in New York. I worked at a restaurant on the Upper West Side called Isabella's. I waited on a lot of interesting people there, including Bruce Willis and a few others and whatnot. Bruce Willis is by far the most interesting of the celebrities that I waited on there. But I did wait on Bono one day. This was back in 2003, and he already had way less hair than he liked to present on TV. It was interesting. It took me a while to figure out that it was Bono because there was so little hair.
Yeah.
To me, I could always kind of tell that U2 was sort of this was mind control music. That Joshua Tree album, like that is very true to the sound and the vibe of Joshua Tree. That's where you go out there and you can see all the stuff going on in the vast expanse of the desert and the sky, and how sound and light distort things. And that's where I've had some of my interesting observing the top of the dome experience and seeing things come through and leave and whatnot. So and that album captures some of that kind of soundscape in a way that in my opinion, normally only more like more dance music normally would capture, but Brian Eno is good at grabbing those same kinds of soundscapes and applying them to more sort of pop kind of music and whatnot. But the other thing that I have with fucking U2 is like they have some album that was like automatically downloaded on everybody's iTunes on everything. And what's fucking weird about this shit is that it, like whenever my phone starts to fritz out, right? Like whenever the earphones start doing weird things, like playing songs that you're not trying to play, it always goes to that album. I can't figure out how to get it off there. It doesn't play any songs that I downloaded or that I like or anything that I never use iTunes. It doesn't do any applications I use, and it always plays those songs from that album, and all of those titles on those songs. And this isn't just for me. For a lot of people I've talked to, every title of every track on that album is a title that is somehow related to a certain kind of mind control program or thing that I experienced. It's all like raised by wolves, this by that, all that kind of stuff. It's there for that purpose, right? Like it's kind of, I can't get rid of it because, it follows me around. Laura tried to get it off my phone. She spent some time on that the other day. You can't get it off, right? And it's always those songs that sort of pop up. But U2, yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, I think your point about that decadence that they go to, and they move from the space of maybe, and this happens with lots of bands and lots of artists, right? They move from the space of like, okay, maybe there's some level of Tavistockian influence or control, but they're still creating on a certain level some type of organic art into a place where it's just all that shit, where it's just all that sort of dark, decadent, like mind control induction into the OSS, whatever kind of shit, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think that they set out to be, an MI6 band,
Mm-hmm.
but
they
along the way they got drafted.
Yeah.
And the Edge is a phenomenally talented guitarist.
Yep.
Like he's incredible. Like he does things on guitar that very few people, like he changed the guitar in a way, like the same way that Jimi Hendrix changed the guitar, because he could play both lead and rhythm at the same time. And he would set it up with, echo and, sort of echo and reverb. Mm-hmm. So he set up the echo and the reverb, and he would, play those, those leads, those rhythms, right? And then he would hit a pedal, and it would go straight back to the guitar, and it wouldn't have the same echo and reverb, but it'd be playing through the speakers, right? And he could play the lead over that, and that's what he was doing. And and he was really incredibly adept at it. Mm-hmm. And then the other guys are very good musicians as well. Larry Mullen Jr. and then the bass player, Larry Clayton. Larry Clayton, by the way, not Larry Clayton. Larry Mullen, Clayton. What's this is not Adam. I think it's Adam. I think it's Adam Clayton. Anyway, he dated Naomi Campbell for a while. Mm-hmm. So there's your little MK Ultra.
Yeah.
But I think they fingered that band and said, this is a band we want to get behind.
Yeah. Well, and I think for a variety of reasons, but probably one of the most is the because of the vocal what Bono's voice does accomplishes that thing that they're always trying to do of just really opening somebody up, right? That vibration, just all walls are down, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, when they're trying to, with the mRNA vaccine, perforate the cell wall so that they can deliver the payload, right? You have to weaken the integrity of the cell wall, right? Your fucking guard, your protection against, ideas that are not your own go away, right? To a certain extent, when you hear his voice. What was I going to say? It's so, they used to be so anti-war. You don't ever hear them say anything about that now. They don't ever criticize what the United States is doing in other countries or.
No. That's
Yeah.
they don't. I mean, it was real. I mean, even a guy like Bruce Springsteen. You go back and look at it. And I've talked about this concert that I went to. It was, I think, 1985. I believe it was 1985, 86, right, or 86. And Amnesty International was huge at that time. Like, for whatever reason, like a lot of people got behind Amnesty International and were trying to free these political prisoners. So at this concert that I attended, it was the Neville Brothers. First time I'd ever heard the Neville Brothers live. They were tremendous. And Joan Baez, who goes back to the 60s, obviously.
Yeah.
And then you had Lou Reed, who was there. Of course, Lou Reed connects with U2, who are on that bill. You have Jackson Brown, a noted activist, by the way. You have, who else? Bruce Springsteen wasn't there that night, but later in '88, the whole Amnesty thing kept rolling. And he would perform an Amnesty concert at the Oakland Coliseum with Tracy Chapman and Peter Gabriel. Peter Gabriel was there that night. Okay, he was there that night playing. Bryan Adams was there playing. Sting was there. I mean, these are all people with very, how should we say, obvious activist roots or connections in the 1990s. And where are they?
Yeah.
They're silent, right? They are totally silent. Sting, who donated a ton of money to protect the Amazon, where is he for the people of Australia?
That's what's crazy. There was a time in the 80s and 90s, if they saw what is going on with the police, with the people in Victoria, if they seen that happening to someone in a war-torn country or a poor country or whatever, they'd be doing a concert and having everybody, do all that kind of stuff and whatever. Absolute silence. Absolute. I mean, like it is shocking, right? Like whether or not, like if you, the evidence and the proof that this is a completely controlled society and that these artists and celebrities are completely controlled is that whether or not you think the virus is real or not and that people should wear masks or not, beating somebody with the billy club because they're saying they don't want to wear the mask, right? Like, you could say, look, I think this person should wear the mask. I think this virus is real. I think we all need to be careful, but beating somebody with the billy club over it is not okay. Right. And the fact that never happens is the evidence that everything that they do is completely synthetic astroturf bullshit.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You never hear that. You never hear any nuanced things saying, I disagree with this person, but they shouldn't be beaten. You never hear that. Never.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the thing you said about that the Black Lives Matter has removed the part about breaking up the nuclear family.
Before we do that, really quickly, really quickly, I'm on this interesting, like while you were talking, I found this because I was trying to figure out whether Bono is Jewish or not.
Okay.
And because his last name is Houston, which is kind of connected to the word Houston.
Yeah.
But there's an interesting connection with the J and the H, right?
Okay.
Like Houston, Juicin, right? I mean, there's a kind of an interesting thing there, possibly, right? But what's fascinating is that there was an American filmmaker named Norman Jewison, who is not Jewish.
Yeah. Which
is ironic, right? So you can't, and I'm just trying to understand, where Bono fits in the scheme of things. So I found this interesting article on The Forward, which is a Jewish website and magazine, and it's called The Secret Jewish History of Robin Hood.
Oh.
And
Olivia is confirming that you're onto something here. Yeah.
So check this out, right? So there is a version of Robin Hood that came out, I guess, in 2018 or whatever, and it was directed by this guy Otto Bathurst, the director of Peaky Blinders and Black Mirror. Taron Egerton plays Robin Hood. Jamie Foxx is Little John. Ben Mendelsohn is the sheriff. And guess who plays Maid Marian?
Who?
Eva Hewson, Bono's daughter.
Oh, that's interesting. So, we just did a Conspiracy Cocktail last week, and we did Project Power, which is Jamie Foxx's new movie. And when Jeff was researching sort of some of the decoding of it, apparently, like, it is a sort of removed, it's a trilogy with that Robin Hood and then a movie called Old Guard and then this Project Power. And it isn't a trilogy in the sense that they designed the movies to be connected. It's more of a trilogy, like along the lines of when you look at the arc of someone's career, the sort of connection between one role and the next kind of thing. So that's very interesting that you bring this movie up, because I'd never heard of this Robin Hood with Jamie Foxx.
Yeah, they always remake Robin Hood, and they remake it for a particular kind of social climate, right? So the first Robin Hood is with Errol Flynn.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, he's swashbuckling, he's handsome, he's daring, and of course he's Errol Flynn, and that's supposed to sort of personify kind of this brigand, kind of outlaw Anglo culture, right? Now the second version, there's another one after that, I forget who's in it, but the one that really kind of makes the next splash is with Kevin Costner playing Robin Hood.
Yeah, I remember that.
And this is where they introduce Morgan Freeman. Morgan Freeman has a role in Kevin Costner's Robin Hood. So they're introducing this idea of diversity.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the new one, or the latest one, where Jamie Foxx actually plays Friar Tuck, which is completely, and again, it's a more sort of contemporary version. It's clearly about diversity in the latest version of Robin Hood. So they always recast, they do this with movies. They'll recast movies for contemporary social theme.
Yeah.
Robin Hood's one of them. Keep going.
Okay, so were we done with the Bono being Jewish connections?
Well, yeah, I think we're just done with Bono in general. Yeah.
All right, cool. I've always been done with Bono. So what you were saying about Black Lives Matter removing the part about destroying the nuclear family. So do you think that is just because of the Democrats' concern that, like, okay, we're pissing people off, that like maybe we could have gotten to go for Biden because of just a slight return to normalcy? Or do you think that like this is because of the how vocal people like Larry Elder has been, and Candace Owens, and because you're starting to see it seep now into even some like intellectual rap artists and some black celebrities or activists that you wouldn't consider to be conservative, but are recognizing the fact that the not having a father in the home for Black families has really been a larger contributor to what's going on as far as like gang activity, than what the left would rather say it was. Do you think that's why that like the sort of word has gotten out about how that that's the big issue, or do you think it's just something else? They just realized it wasn't selling well with people on the right who could have been persuaded to vote for Joe Biden?
Yeah, I think it's probably the latter. The
Larry Elder stuff.
I think it's the Larry Elder. I mean, Tucker Carlson is the most watched person on TV.
Yeah.
I mean, his ratings confirm that.
Yeah.
So if Tucker Carlson is bombarding the American public with message after message about the riots and about really what Black Lives Matter is all about, and you do get people like Larry Elder on there who will confirm that, and he's got a kind of a rotating cast of characters. That they're gonna move the needle, and they've stopped the riots in Portland now. because they've gotten the message like, look, this has become very, very damaging to us.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really interesting is we live in such a weird, inverted, upside down world that that I was on a Twitter feed yesterday, and the Democrats supposedly were saying the GOP will stoop. They have no morals or ethics. They'll stoop to anything. They're the ones that are starting these riots. They're the ones that are burning everything.
They're saying that the GOP is doing that?
Yeah, they're saying that everything has been infiltrated by the GOP and the right wing. They're the cause of all the destruction. And they're the ones that are always changing the rules. I'm like, what planet am I on?
Well, that was the purpose. Did you see that guy, like the whistleblower from Homeland Security or whatever last week, who came out and said the most dangerous threat to America right now is right-wing extremism?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, like it's the whole inverse of reality play completely.
Yeah, I mean, the DHS guy is Chad Wolf.
That's not the guy who was a whistleblower. The whistleblower.
No, the whistleblower is the FBI guy from the FBI, right?
Oh, okay. I thought it was somebody who left Homeland Security.
No.
Okay.
No, they actually came out and said it. It wasn't like they left. There was a guy who was in the FBI, and he blew the whistle on the Wiener laptop.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that one too. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I think like this is, but people, I mean, we're seeing this old switcheroo, flipperoo too now with suddenly the people on the left are anti-vax, right? So like they're, literally, like if you can get enough people to say something that is the opposite of what's true, right, then it like that seems to work. I don't know why it's so much easier for people to believe an untruth than to believe a truth. Yeah. Why do you think that is? Even when it's ridiculous stuff, like sure, it's always better to it's always easier. Like a person wants to believe something that sounds good to them, right? But what we're talking about here, like right-wing extremism and left-wing extremism, none of them are like unicorns and lollipops, right? So it's like, I don't understand this psychology of like accepting as true everything that is not and rejecting as false everything that is.
I think it's right out of the 1984 playbook.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like, again, it's all, really scripted, again, this massive open air experiment mm-hmm. that people are in right now. And it's just mind blowing to watch how fast these things change. Like, you would think for a long time, the left was really, really pro-vax. Mm-hmm. Like if you were anti-vax, it was the left that was demonizing you.
Right.
Right. And now all of a sudden, because Trump is, bringing the vaccine to the public at light speed, and all of a sudden the left is anti-vax. The whole thing is just completely bizarre.
They're like, yeah, maybe masks are better than vax.
It's completely bizarre.
Yeah.
Well, how can we trust this vaccine?
Yeah.
How can we trust it? Oh, well, gee, welcome to the fucking, party.
Well, I think this is the sort of like, depending on the position that you take on who Trump is and where he comes from and what he's actually doing here, right? If you think about the brilliance of whatever happened on the election night in 2016, there was obviously a decision made at some point in the evening that they were going with Trump. That's and right. I'm sure there was people that always wanted Trump for reasons that different reasons, but I think part of the reason that sort of opposed to the people control system maybe decided, oh, Trump is a good idea, is because he is so polarizing that you will get you'll break down all trust in everything, right? Mm-hmm. Like you can get to a certain extent, Trump has caused delusion in almost everybody, right? Trump derangement syndrome is something that exists on the left, but also exists on the right, right? And you get, we're at this point right now where everything that is making news is the inverse of anything that makes any sense and whatnot. And I think that when a society is in that level of chaos and that unclear in their thinking, then that creates a lot of opportunity, right? That's why he's the trump card, right? When nothing else is working anymore, let's just throw the thing in that will make the most amount of chaos, even if it means we're going to have to deal with some things we don't like because of, whatever, right? I feel like that was,
that we would reject the status quo.
yeah.
And the status quo has been proven to be, I mean, for a long time, the status quo was this like large kind of lurching thing that was creeping like a glacier. And it didn't really impact people dramatically. And that changed. And it really changes around Reagan. And then it really changes with Clinton. Like the status quo really changes because the Clintons start to do business in the White House in a way that nobody's ever done before.
Yeah.
And so we got used to a new status quo, right? There was an old status quo, which was, you know, government is pretty much clumsy, ineffective. At times, partisanship could, you know, sort of cancel each other out, although clearly there are periods where that's not true. But even Reagan was a rejection of the status quo. You know, Reagan was really Trump 1.0.
Yeah.
And one of the things that people don't know about Reagan is that Reagan employed the Stanford Research Institute in his campaign. And it was one of the first campaigns that used computerized social data.
Oh, interesting.
And they sent out punch cards, you know, the old like IBM punch cards. They sent them out to, you know, a control group, and the control group basically answered all these questions, and they read the data, and the data is that, look, people want to be left alone.
Yeah.
They want to be able to like, you know, pursue their hobbies. And by this time, they're like, you know, sort of kind of, you know, they're into the boomers, right? The boomers, this is 1980. So you're getting boomers like kind of right at their beginning, their peak of financial prosperity. They're like entering, you know, the early boomers are around 40, like 45, right?
Yeah.
So 1980 would put them at about, what, 35 years old. So you're seeing the boomers really hitting 30 and a little bit beyond. So they're entering corporate America. They're going into higher levels of management. They're making money. They're not just living off of the largesse of their parents or whatever. So at that point, what do they want to do? Well, they don't want to be taxed as much. They want to keep more of their money. And they found out that they like things like their private time and their hobbies, and they like going out and canoeing. And what do they do with all that information? Reagan then he sculpts his message. And he says, we're going to be a government that is going to be a smaller government. We're going to be a government that is going to basically leave you alone so that you can pursue the things that you enjoy. And they culled all that data from SRI. And if you think about it, right, if you think about it, you would think that the boomers who come out of the 60s would be so anti-Reagan, that they wouldn't want this guy, right? When he was the governor of California, he was not like counterculture friendly.
Yeah.
And yet they wind up voting for him in record numbers. You watch the election from 1980, which I did. I went back and I watched the whole night. And it's a really interesting presentation, by the way. Reagan wins that election within 90 minutes.
Oh,
90
wow.
minutes. He gets enough electoral votes within 90 minutes that they call it. That's it. Done. One of the greatest landslides in history. And one of the reasons why we're contributed is Iran-Contra. Iran-Contra happens just before that election.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Carter is like dealing with the hostage fucking crisis.
Yeah.
Right? And who created that? But that's not the reason really, and that might have been the tilt, but they addressed the message because the boomers had moved on from protesting and wanting to kill their father, Nixon, to being kind of consolidated and corporatized, and they wanted to hold on to things and live their lives without a lot of interference. And that's what Reagan's message was. It was brilliant. It was totally brilliant.
It's interesting, sort of. Okay, so there, you're right in that he was like Trump 1.0,
yep.
Right? Because the SRI, which normally has doesn't really care what people want. They have an idea of the world that they're trying to impose. But in this sense, they were able to use that sort of to craft a candidate that would do that on a certain level, right? You have your trickle down economics, you have a little bit smaller government in some ways, but they had this situation with Jimmy Carter that then led into the crack thing and the dare thing and all this imprisoning people for all this drug stuff, that was something that really, even though it was set in place, you know, as far back as like, you know, Nixon on a certain level, or, you know, some of that stuff. And then certainly in Carter, like that's when you really have this expansion of the prison industrial complex, was during Reagan, right? And that Iran-Contra stuff was part of the crack epidemic and all that kind of stuff, right? And,
well, but what really takes off with Bill Clinton.
Yes.
Because Bill Clinton has the 3 strikes law, right? He's the guy that brings 3 strikes into everything.
Yes, but you have this introduction of DARE, which if you really look into DARE, that was there to entice children into drugs, right? Like I didn't ever think about drugs until I went to DARE, right? Like I know lots of people who it wasn't even a thing that they knew about until that. It really introduced this concept, right, of drugs to kids on a wider sort of scale, right? And you know, and then at a certain point when you're in junior high or high school, the thing that you're told not to do becomes the thing that you want to do, and all this kind of stuff. But also, he was like one of the first real, just on some ways, puppet presidents that were really being maneuvered by the team around him. Because he was an actor, right? So in him, you have all this stuff that you can do. Even though the control system, you know, that would like everything to be more, you know, he had influences. I mean, if you look into like Charlotte Iserbyt's work, or what's his name, the other guy who wrote, the guy who, fuck, I can't think of his name right now. But anyway, like, you know, there was lots of communist influence on Reagan. And so, right.
So here's the influence of Reagan. First of all, Reagan shows up in the House of Un-American Activities. Like he's called before the House of Un-American Activities with Joe McCarthy. And he basically is anti-commie. Like he comes out and starts blowing whistles on people. Right. So Reagan is starting to cut his political teeth. The person who's really behind Reagan is a guy by the name of Lew Wasserman.
Okay.
And Lew Wasserman was
any relation to Debbie Wasserman Schultz?
Who knows? Maybe.
Okay.
Lew Wasserman was one of the most powerful people in Hollywood, bar none.
Okay.
He was the head of MCA. Yeah. And so Lew Wasserman was a manager. Like he managed actors' careers. And if you had a management agency, you could not also own a studio because it was considered to be too much of a consolidation of power. Well, when Ronald Reagan was the president of the Screen Actors Guild, he changed all that, right? He made it possible for Lew Wasserman to be both an agent and an owner of a studio, okay? So when that happened, Lew Wasserman consolidated power in a big, big way. And there's a really interesting documentary called The Last Mogul, and it's about Lew Wasserman. And Lew Wasserman then decides that he is going to help Ronald Reagan become president. Right. So he is really like Lew Wasserman is Ronald Reagan's Sheldon Adelson.
Okay.
And then what's also interesting, this is really interesting, is that at the end of the documentary, he starts talking about this other young guy that he's really interested in. And the guy's name is Bill Clinton. Okay. And this is all pre-Clinton.
Yeah.
So Lew Wasserman gets in on the Clinton thing and helps Clinton become elected. So this is the guy that really is a major player in the election of Ronald Reagan.
Is there any connection between Wasserman and like the Bloodworths? Bloodworth Thomason, you know, Linda Bloodworth and Harry Thomason, Evening Shade, Designing Women, all that stuff, because they were Clinton supporters from way back then as well, and also they're very powerful in Hollywood. They have
Well, if there is a connection, it would be through Suzanne Pleshette, and I don't know if she was on any of their shows, but Suzanne Pleshette, I believe, was Lew Wasserman's mistress.
Okay.
And of course, she plays Bob Newhart's wife on the Bob Newhart show. And she's in that documentary, and she's their bear witness to what a great man Lew Wasserman was. So I highly recommend watching this documentary, because you'll understand how power works, and especially power in Hollywood. And it was really a payback for Reagan to change the rules where somebody who's a manager could run a studio. Never happened before.
And then you see, so basically we're saying that like during Reagan's era, like before, even before he was president, was where we started to see the coming together of the political system and Hollywood in a different way than what we've seen before. And this model of consolidating power, political and financial in the movie industry, then plays out later in like Bill Clinton's presidency when they're doing business from the White House.
Oh, absolutely. And the other thing that's really notable about Reagan is like who's in his cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
You have Donald Rumsfeld, you have Dick Cheney,
you
have George Bush, and you have essentially the inception of the neocons. And if I'm not mistaken, Roger Stone has a play inside of the Reagan White House.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Pacinic is involved.
Oh, Steve Pacinic, that guy makes my skin crawl.
Steve Pacinic's involved with Reagan, right?
Yeah.
So you see this cast of characters who are starting to really cut their political teeth. Actually, they started to cut their political teeth under Nixon.
Yeah.
And then they come back in through Reagan, and we're going to see them again in the Bush administration. So you can see where the neocons kind of, move in. Now, what's interesting about Trump is the defection of the neocons. And they said, well, because the neocons are actually liberals at one point.
Yeah.
And they saw where the power was headed and said, well, we're just going to go with the power. They don't care.
Yeah.
That's what happens with these people. They don't care where the power is. They don't care if they're on the left or the right. They'll just go with the power.
Okay, so this winds me back to something that you touched on in the beginning that I wanted to comment on, and that is like these people, right? These people who do this shit, like the fucking Weather Underground, or these people that we're talking about now, like, where do these people come from? Are we the same species? Like this idea, like when you were talking about how the Weather Underground's plans to just put people in camp and kill millions of people and didn't seem to bother them at all. I mean, that's essentially, what are all these people you're talking about? They sort of feel the same way. Are we a separate species? I'm not just like joking around here, right? Like the idea, first of all, I never think about killing somebody, but then the idea that like, people I disagree with, we're just going to have to get rid of them. Like sometimes I wish the people that are doing all this annoying stuff would just like go away and find their own island, but I never think about killing them, right? So these people who not only think about killing the people who are their opposition, but so like offhand, so like simply just, we'll do it with millions, we'll put them in camps and we'll gas them. Like, where do these people come from? Like, I don't understand. Like you watch the way dogs behave and it's all within like a similar, range of things, right? But the vast difference in the way that people behave, is obviously humans' brains are different and whatnot, but like there are quite clearly people that will kill people and people that won't, right? Like all tigers, tigers kill things. Not all, right? All dogs don't really. Maybe they'll kill a squirrel or whatever. But like, what is this with these people that just completely? I mean, it's so foreign to anything that I ever even think about, much less wonder about whether it would be okay or not, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What are they?
I gave this a lot of thought in the 90s. And I was like, why can certain people be predisposed to extreme amounts of cruelty, extreme amounts of malice,
Mm-hmm.
extreme amounts of lack of empathy, extreme amounts of not caring about things like continuity in the future. And the only thing I could come up with was that we're dealing with like an alien species. I mean, that's the only thing I could come up with, is that they've got a different kind of chromosomal set.
Yep.
And then you factor in some of the stuff we were talking about, like the third wave or the Stanford Prison Experiment, and how they could get people who are not of the same theoretical species or chromosomal group
and mind control them into it
and move them into that. Now that to me is, I think, the one part that's terrifying, right? Because if it's a small group of people who operate at a level without conscience and yet can move a large group of people into a level without conscience, that's terrifying.
Well, and have you ever noticed, and I had a very interesting interview with this guy named Victor Buga yesterday. The show will be out next week. There's a lot of things there that you may be interested in. It was interesting on a number of levels, but he was talking about like a lot of people who are in control of the system that do a lot of these things that seem inhumane. A lot of them are sort of neutral about it. Like they're doing it because it's efficient and it has a certain payoff or end result. They're not necessarily enjoy. It isn't so much that they like enjoy it and get off on it. But the people that so those are the people I think that are genetically a different species. But when you're talking about the people who are moved into that, those people to me are even more scary. They're the ones who really seem to relish their newfound power. Like
and that's what we're going through right now.
Yeah.
So I'm going to relate an experience I had last night. I went out to dinner, and I went to a restaurant in Johnson City. And, I don't really go to Johnson City because there's really nothing for me.
Nothing there. I was like, there's a restaurant in Johnson City?
No, and actually a very, very good one, by the way. So I went there.
Maybe I'll hit it on my trip.
I went there, and normally, I try to have as much situational awareness as possible. Mm-hmm. But I was feeling kind of spacey yesterday. Mm-hmm. So I go there, and immediately I see two people walking in with masks behind me. I'm like, okay, well, all right, they got masks on. How am I going to deal with this? Really quickly, I said, I'm just going to Normandy this thing. I'm going to storm it, right, and go, right to the back. And as I'm walking to the back table, the waiter jumps in my face. He's about 6'5". He's not skinny, but he's also not like Buffy, right? He looks like, quite frankly, another species. And he jumps in my face. I mean, literally jumps in my face and says that I have to wear a mask to get to the table. And I'm like, what? And of course, everybody's sitting down. They're not wearing masks. And I said, I have an underlying condition. And he says, I don't care. You still have to wear a mask. Right? And he was really aggressive about it. Super aggressive.
Yeah.
And I wound up not eating there. I said, this is bullshit. And we left. And we went to another restaurant in town, not a mask. I mean, you could wear a mask going in, but guess what? They didn't say anything.
Yeah.
We went to the table without a mask. We spent the whole time there, left, no mask, no problem. So this is a real issue because it sets up cognitive dissonance. Mm-hmm. But that guy relished it, right? He relished that moment. In that moment, he had theoretical power over me.
Well, this is the difference between if somebody who didn't relish it might just pretend that they didn't see you and not say anything, right? Even though they're supposed to say something. Or they might say, I understand, but it's our policy, and look kind of embarrassed to have to say anything. But he said, I don't care. He didn't say, my manager says you have to. He owned it. He's like, I don't care.
Right. He could have said, hey, look, it's a restaurant policy. I'm not into it, but I have to enforce it. And look, if you don't want to wear a mask, there are tables outside and I can seat you out there.
Yeah.
Right?
No, he loved that. He
was so into it.
Yeah.
So into it. Right. So this speaks exactly to what you're talking about. And think of all the people that in their minds have been either traumatized or bullied or given short shrift or given the shaft, or they think that life has fucked them over, or, and their father left them or whatever. Think of the buried psychological grudges these people have.
They're having their Hitler moment, right? That's the kind of background Hitler had, right? He had no power growing up, right? All those things you just said, right? And he found this way into exactly what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And, exactly. And wasn't that third wave thing was to show what happened in Nazi Germany, right? That movie, The Wave, that Ron Jones guy, he was doing this to explain to his students how Nazism happened, right?
Right.
Right. So that's just exactly it.
Fascism. He wanted to show how fascism
would
develop. So yeah, yeah. There's another really interesting movie called We Live in Public. Have you ever seen that movie?
No. Do
It's
you
a
ever
very
sleep? Do you ever sleep? I don't understand how you have time to watch all of these things.
well, I spend most of my time either doing research or working with people. I don't really have a life,
Yeah.
right? So We Live in Public was a film by this woman named Andi Timiner. And I actually met Andi. I interviewed her. She's kind of interesting in a lot of ways. She also did a movie about the Brian Jonestown massacre and that other group, the Dandy Warhols.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really interesting movie, by the way.
Okay.
But We Live in Public is a documentary about this guy who'd made a lot of money on the internet back in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And he wound up who was it? It was through like I think CompuServe or it was one of the early internet companies. He made a shitload of money.
Yeah.
So he decided that he was going to have a 30-day like version of a Taz in New York. And it was in this building, and a lot of it was underground.
What's a version of a Taz? What's a Taz?
Yeah, like a temporary autonomous zone.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah, okay.
And so Andi was there. She was part of this thing. So she documents the whole thing. And I don't know if this guy is intel. He wound up eventually like chucking everything and buying an apple farm.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a Ken Kesey moment, right?
Yeah.
But I highly recommend We Live in Public. You should watch.
All right.
People should watch this movie because again, it's one of these things that you begin to witness how people kind of, bond, break down, and he was always introducing kind of new variables.
Mm-hmm.
Like one of the things that he introduced is he introduced a firing range, and eventually Giuliani and the cops have to break this thing up. So I might even talk about it tomorrow on my show. But these things go on all the time, and we're just really in an open range experiment now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, every place is the laboratory now. It's not confined to the halls of, universities or whatever, any at all, right? It's all just open air, have at it all the time.
Yep. And, people have to figure out, where you're going to be in the experiment and, what your variable is and, the role that you play in the experiment. Because we're all playing a role, whether we believe it or not, or understand it or not. Like I'm playing a role. I'm the resistor role, right? And what are they learning from me? And you're playing a role. We're all playing roles, and we're all part of the experiment. We're not outside of it.
Yeah, no,
we're all data points.
I mean, this is absolutely. I mean, I think sometimes we have to be cautious about what even with some of us who have broad imaginations and abilities for connecting things to one thing to another. Sometimes when we analyze some of this stuff, I'm concerned we're giving them ideas that they haven't thought of yet, right? And I think in some ways that's also why we are just permitted to keep talking, right? Like why more of our stuff doesn't get taken down. I think that we're being watched, we're being analyzed.
Absolutely.
We're being, I'm starting to see, and I know you are as well, feedback and data streams, from our analysis, like some things that you and I say, then something being sort of shot right back, through some of the data streams that we've analyzed almost, right? Mm-hmm. I've even seen them adopting synthetic versions of some of our positions, right, on things like that. We're sort of like take an underlying part of it and then manipulate it and whatever. But yeah, no, we're all participating. You know what I mean? Like this, that's definitely, even the people who think that they're not participating, right? People who've chosen to go live far off grid and all that's being analyzed too.
Absolutely. If you want to play the role of the gray man, that's you're participating. You're in the experiment.
I do think, for all the other stuff that he says, some of it I agree with, some of it I definitely don't. But Miles, is it Mathis or Matheson? I can never remember.
Mathis, M-A-T-H-I-S.
He said it's this weird situation we live in where there's like 1,000 people bothering one person, right? 1,000 people watching one, right? Like there's like a person, and then there's 1,000 analyzers or data reporters on what that one person is doing, right? Like it's very strange, like, you know, how it works. But, you know, and it's this system of everybody sort of on a certain level managing and handling everybody else, even though they're not necessarily aware of their roles, right? There are some people that are very aware, others that aren't aware at all, but most people exist somewhere in between, probably, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we live in a fucking very weird place, Robert. Right? I'm trying to understand like the boundary conditions, right, of the space that we're in, right? You know, because and sort of what the boundary conditions and how that sort of sets up the rules of engagement and the entrance and exit possibilities and whatnot. But this shit's fucking weird, dude.
Yeah, it is very strange.
All right, so should we wrap up and just talk for a few minutes about the big day is almost here, Robert?
Oh, I know.
Excited?
Of course, absolutely.
Who's gonna watch Jasper and Rosie?
Well, somebody will watch them.
Somebody will watch them. I didn't know if Jasper is able to babysit himself.
So I may be turned into Peter, but by somebody, but I've left them for periods of up to 5 days with just a shitload of cat food in about 3 cat boxes.
Yeah.
And they were fine.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're fine. They're fine. I mean, look, it's sort of 3 days.
Yeah.
And
this is the wonderful thing about cats is they're always fine, and if they're mad at you, they'll just shit on your bed, right? And so you get payback, right? They don't need to send the cops in to bust you for whatever. The cat shit on your bed, and that's kind of worse, and whatever, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, cats are much more self-sustaining than dogs or people or anything.
Yeah, they are, and God bless them for that. Yeah, it's going to be great. People are going to start arriving next Thursday. And then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we're off and running. Got a good group of people. Have a lot of really great. This is like going to be an entertainment-rich experience. A lot of music. There's going to be a lot of music. We're going to have Hope Easton. Mm-hmm. She's going to be here. She's going to be playing cello, and that's going to be really terrific. And then Masaki, aka Akaida, is going to spin. And then when we go out to the horse ranch on Sunday, Lee Guest, who is a really, really good, spunky, fiery singer-songwriter, she'll be performing out there. So we're going to have a lot of music, which is going to be terrific. Saturday will be, information and information, nutrient dense.
Yeah.
We're going to have our Matrix Mash. It'll be a panel, a little panel discussion. Masaki will be presenting. I'll be presenting. And a lot of people have skills and talents that they're bringing to the, to the table. I've got a sound healer coming in from Montana. Steve, of course, is a body worker. So a lot of it will also be very participatory with the people that are there. And, it's last year, the thing that was beautiful about last year is that it just all kind of self-assembled.
Yep.
And that's kind of always been, my idea as to how these things work is like self-assemblage. And I know that there'll probably be an element of that, but it'll always be different people, different personalities, and different kinds of experiences and different kinds of outcomes. But for all intents and purposes, there's a lot of shared kind of vision and a lot of shared sort of intent. And a lot of the thing I really like about the group last year was that there were, in my estimation, kind of a lot of chiefs that weren't afraid to be Indians. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There were a lot of very strong personalities, and they were able to be strong personalities, but they were also willing to help other people and assist other people.
Yeah.
And that to me was like, you can be as chiefy as you want as long as you are willing to be an Indian too.
Yeah.
and that was great. And, and I hope that we somehow replicate at least, a portion of that or as much of that as we can this year.
I think well, we're really looking forward to it. First of all, we're excited. I'm excited to be going again and joining you in this venture and whatnot. But I also think that it's probably going to be extremely energetic and magical this year, because I think people have been very hungry for connection with people in general, because there's a lot of people that have been very isolated during this time, but especially connection with people who are either like-minded or able to respect your different mind, right? And I think that's, for a lot of people that are isolated, the only people who maybe they've seen during this period of time is their family, and their family is not awake. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's been, it's been in that, well, I don't even know if I want to go be around people because it's going to be a shit show and a fight. Right. And so I think that there'll probably be quite a bit of energy and quite a bit of magic. And I think people will be really happy to see other people.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things is that even though he won't be participating in the events, but he'll be joining us at our meals, is we're going to have a 9-year-old in our group.
Oh, that's
so
cool.
Somebody's bringing their 9-year-old son, who will be watched by his grandfather and her father, and both the grandfather and the son will be at our meals. So we're going to have a young person in our midst, which we didn't have last year.
That's really cool.
It's going to be really, really cool. And so we'll also be able to see this continuity piece between the generations, which is so sorely missing in our world.
Yeah.
And so that'd be cool, and they'll join us on the final day and be part of our group when we go out to the
ranch.
Yep.
Cool.
And I got a few other things that we're going to be doing that I've not shared.
Yeah, I look forward to being surprised as well.
Right. So element of surprise for sure.
Awesome. All right. So then I guess the next time we'll see you all is when we're mashing live from the event. And for those of you who are watching right now, if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do so, because as soon as we hit 1,000, we can live stream from here, and we can do super chat and a lot of fun things that we've been wanting to do for a while. So make sure you've done that. And Robert, my friend, I look forward to seeing you.
We'll see you next week.
All right, cool. Bye-bye, guys.